Hi, and welcome to Once Upon a Nightmare. I'm your host, Amy Medcalf.
And I'm your other host, Ashley Dory, and welcome to today's nightmare.
So tonight we are talking about vampires or vampires, depending on what you want to go with in the legend. So we're going to be talking about the legend media, and I think I have like a cool story to tell.
Nice.
So yeah, so grab. Oh, saw a dog that's not a ghost this time. Just see a dog's fluffy butt.
You know.
You might see or hear my dogs behind. Oh,
pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
So grab your snack. Oh, or maybe your blood pack. Let's get to it.
I think you were supposed to say, so sit back.
Sit back,
grab your snacks.
Dogs have me so like frazzled. Sit back, grab your blood packs, hung upside down. I don't know, whatever vampires
upside
do.
Down pineapple cake.
Ooh. Well, I don't know if that really goes with the vampire theme.
It might. What if a vampire really liked upside down pineapple cake?
True.
They were people beforehand.
Can't be mother's old upside down pineapple cake. But yeah, so let's get to it, shall we? I guess I'm starting because I'm starting with the history.
You start today.
You're probably going to hear thunder because it just started thundering. Perfect for talking about spooky things. Don't need any sound bites for this one. Not that we use them anyway.
No, although I would absolutely love to use sound bites.
Eventually, we'll need a sound bar. So today I'm using my crappy computer because I don't know where my tablet is. Do not tell my boyfriend. Maybe I left it in Nova Scotia. Who knows?
I don't think so. I haven't found it yet.
I'm pretty sure I had it in my bag, so it could be somewhere in my car. And yeah, so.
Well, if I find it, I will let you know.
Yeah. Speaking of Nova Scotia, I was in Nova Scotia and we did film this episode together in person, but unfortunately technology hates us.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but technology really hates us and there was no sound. So I think one person was watching our silent video on YouTube and there was a couple of downloads on Buzzsprout, but those could have been automatic downloads. I'm hoping, and nobody heard our silentness.
Or nothing, or void of nothing. Well, yeah. I mean, it's just it's the way it goes when you live in a haunted house, apparently, because both of us saw the light on the microphone and we're both like, okay.
Yeah. And then your ring light cord was severed too.
Yeah.
And that had fixed before we could do anything. So
yeah. And welcome to my haunted house.
Yeah. So, all right. So vampires are evil mythological beings who roam at night searching for people whose blood they feed upon. They may be the best known classic monsters of all. Most people associate vampires with Count Dracula, the legendary blood-sucking subject of Bram Stoker's epic novel Dracula, which was published in 1897. A good long time ago. EJ would say that I was born around that time. She says I'm old and that I'm a vampire, so who knows? But the history of vampires began long before Stoker was born. Now, what is a vampire? There are almost as many different characteristics of vampires as there are vampire legends. But the main characteristics of vampires or vampires is they drink human blood. They typically drain their victim's blood using their sharp fangs, killing them and turning them into vampires. In general, vampires hunt at night since sunlight weakens their powers. Some may have the ability to morph into a bat or a wolf, which I was thinking today, since we had already gone over this anyway. It's so funny how there's she can't make up her mind. It's so funny how there's such an animosity between vampires and werewolves when apparently vampires can turn into a wolf. I don't know. I was just thinking about that. But anyway, vampires have super strength and often have a hypnotic sensual effect on their victims. They can't see their image in a mirror and cast no shadows. So when we talk about vampires, we also know of Vlad the Impaler. It's thought Bram Stoker named Count Dracula after Vlad Dracula, who is also known as Vlad the Impaler. Vlad Dracula was born in Transylvania, Romania, which legends are always coming out of that area of vampires. He ruled Wallachia, Romania, that is a very hard word to say, off and on from 1456 to 1462. Some historians describe him as a just yet brutally cruel ruler who valiantly fought off the Ottoman Empire. He earned his nickname because his favorite way to kill his enemies was to impale them on a wooden stake. Ouch.
Sounds pretty painful.
Right? And that's how you kill vampires, apparently. So that's probably where that came.
Can you I'm sorry, guys. Just give me 1 second. Real lifetime break in the podcast for a second. You're gonna hear me talking to my husband. Garrett, can you keep the dog in the living room, please? We're filming. Thank you. She keeps like coming in and moving the curtain and stuff. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
So, according to legend, Vlad Dracula enjoyed dining amidst his dying victims and dipping his bread in their blood.
Bread. Blood bread?
Yeah.
Blood pudding.
I wouldn't, not my choice, but yeah.
People put Vegemite on toast, so I can't.
Yeah. Some people do weird things with food. I do like dipping my bread in marinara sauce. That's good.
Just bread? Or like
sometimes
toasted garlic bread?
Both.
I'm judging you a little bit right now.
Listen. Don't talk it till you try.
Soggy bread.
It's so good. Whether those gory, not glory, that would be awful. Whether those gory tales are true is unknown. Many people believe these stories sparked Stoker's imagination to create Count Dracula, who was also from Transylvania, sucked his victim's blood, and could be killed by driving a stake through his heart. But according to Dracula expert Elizabeth Miller, Stoker didn't base Count Dracula's life on Vlad Dracula. Nonetheless, the similarities between the two Draculas are intriguing. Now, the real question is, are vampires real? I don't know about you, but sometimes I wish they were, but like, not like the creepy monstery ones, but like, and not the Twilight ones, but
like Interview with a Vampire vampires,
or like Vampire Diaries. But again, you've never seen Vampire Diaries.
I've never seen Vampire Diaries.
You need to watch Vampire Diaries. It's on Netflix.
I've tried. It's not something that I can get into. I gave it my all. Don't at me.
Now it's my judge you a little bit.
Judge away. Judge, go ahead. It's not the first time.
I will. So Vampire superstition thrived in the Middle Ages, especially as the plague decimated entire towns. The disease often left behind bleeding mouth lesions on its victims, which to the uneducated was a sure sign of a vampire. It wasn't uncommon for anyone with unfamiliar physical or emotional illness to be labeled a vampire. Many researchers have pointed to porphyria, a blood disorder that can cause severe blisters on skin that's exposed to sunlight, as a disease that may have been linked to the vampire legend. So that's, a lot of people have like this allergy to the sun. So I think that's what that is.
Yeah.
So some symptoms of porphyria can be temporarily relieved by ingesting blood, which is really weird. And I don't know how that works.
Maybe the iron. Maybe it's like like I said before, maybe the iron in the blood, or
maybe I should look that up. I'll look that up later. And I'll put it out somewhere.
Well, it would make sense because they wouldn't have iron pills back then.
But this could be also for now too. You never know. So I don't know. It could be a lot of different things. I will look it up and we'll figure it out. Because we're not doctors.
No, far from it.
Far from it. Very, very much far from it. Other diseases blamed for promoting the vampire myth include rabies or goiter. When a suspected vampire died, their bodies were often disinterred to search for signs of vampirism. In some cases, a stake was thrust through the corpse's heart to make sure they stayed dead. Gotta make sure. Other accounts describe the decapitation and burning of the corpses of suspected vampires well into the 19th century. So there was a woman that they claimed to be one of the most notorious vampires, which it's so sad how she got this. Her name was Mercy Brown, and they say she may rival Count Dracula as the most notorious vampire. Unlike Count Dracula, however, Mercy was a real person. She lived in Exeter, Rhode Island, and was the daughter of George Brown, a farmer. After George lost many family members, including Mercy, in the late 1800s to tuberculosis, his community used Mercy as a scapegoat to explain their deaths. It was common at the time to blame several deaths in one family on the undead. The bodies of each dead family member were often exhumed and searched for signs of vampirism. When Mercy's body was exhumed and didn't display severe decay, which was not surprising since her body was placed in an above-ground vault during a New England winter. So she was very well preserved, probably. The townspeople accused her of being a vampire and making her family sick from her icy grave. They cut out her heart, burned it, then fed the ashes to her sick brother. Perhaps not surprisingly, he died shortly thereafter. So
each dead sister's heart.
Enjoy.
Gives a whole new meaning too. I'm going to eat your brains and gain your knowledge.
Oh my goodness.
Except he ate her heart and then ended up dead like she was.
I'm so sad that she couldn't even defend herself because she was already dead and she died from tuberculosis. Like, if she was a vampire, do you think she would have died? Like,
maybe to get away from people.
But yeah. So although science has silenced the vampire fears of the past, people who call themselves vampires do exist. There are normal seeming people who drink small amounts of blood in a perhaps misguided effort to stay healthy. Communities of self-identified vampires can be found on the internet and in cities and towns around the world. To avoid rekindling vampire superstitions, most modern vampires keep to themselves and typically conduct their feeding rituals, which include drinking the blood of willing donors in private. Some vampires don't ingest human blood, but claim to feed off the energies of others. Many state that if they don't feed regularly, they become agitated or depressed. Vampires became mainstream after Dracula was published, but since then, Count Dracula's legendary persona has been the topic of many films, books, and television shows. Given the fascination people have with all things horror, vampires, real or imagined, are likely to continue to inhabit the earth for years to come. So
I
yeah.
don't think the vampire idea will fade or fizzle out anytime soon.
Nah. People fantasize about vampires, let's be honest.
I'm not gonna lie, I still kind of fantasize about like getting bitten by a vampire, you know.
Live forever, drinking the blood of our enemies.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I wouldn't mind drinking the blood. Drinking the blood of my enemies to stay young forever.
Exactly.
I don't have to die.
I'm sure we'll always continuously make enemies anyway.
I mean, people are born every day. People die every day. It's a I can't think.
And we
of
don't
the
have
word.
like
I could do it. I could do it. There's a couple people off the top of my head that
I think we have the same one in mind.
you know.
Yeah.
But let's segue from that. Well, since we're talking about Dracula, into vampires through cinematic history, starting in the late 19th to the early 20th century with 1922 silent film Nosferatu, an unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel. It was widely regarded as a masterpiece and an early adapter of the vampire on screen, although it's far from the first vampire film in existence, though it is the first widely known vampire film. Technically, that honor belongs to an 1896 short film titled The House of the Dead, or Le Meneur du Diable, a French silent film by Georges Méliès, though in this version it was a vampiric I can't say this word, Mephistopheles, which transformed from bat to devil. 1913 brought The Vampire, an American silent film based on the 1897 poem of the same by Rudyard Kipling, and featured a femme fatale vampire type named Sybil. Silent films Dracula's Death and Dracula also beat Nosferatu to the punch in terms of adapting Bram Stoker's work, but both are considered lost films with not much known about them, save for the fact that perhaps they didn't share much in common past Count Dracula. A few other films from the 1920s was London After Midnight, which is a 27 film starring Lon Chaney as the man in the beaver hat. It follows a mysterious abandoned household post the suicide of its owner. 5 years later, it appears to have been taken over by ghoulish figures. It features striking makeup and Chaney's character rendered iconic, that's to his top hat, bat cape, and creepy rows of pointed teeth. But a 1965 MGM vault fire meant the film, as it was original scene intended, has been lost. Browning remade the film in 1935, titled Mark of the Vampire, which starred Bela Lugosi as Count Moira. The vampires in this one was simply a hoax. Then came Universal's 1931 Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula and directed by Todd Browning, loosely based on Stoker's Dracula, or Stoker's getting ahead of myself there. Loosely based on Stoker's novel, it's the first legally authorized adaptation, though it borrows more from the Broadway stage play and Nosferatu. Up until this point, vampires had been mostly devilish and other. This iteration made Dracula a gothic figure of aristocracy and power. Lugosi's presence and take on the character meant that this was the decisive version. The extreme popularity of the film meant many more appearances by the actor in the role in subsequent Universal horror films. Throughout, Dracula remained a snazzy dresser, retained an air of dangerous mystery, and a regal presence that made him a leader of evil. Next, we got the 50s, which brought us, I'm just going to read off some of the titles of the movies, because if we go through all of this history and detail, we will be here for hours.
Long
uh
time. And
but
it's already super late, at least for you, especially.
it is midnight here now. But we have
But
58's Dracula for the most part. Hammer era of vampires kept vampires and Dracula close to the blueprint of the vampire. So throughout the 50s and 60s, the idea of the vampire remained the same in all films. It wasn't until the 70s that they started to experiment with the formula of the vampire, delivering unique takes with vampire films like 72's Vampire Circus, which brought the gothic approach to a strange carnival setting, or The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, which was a collaboration between Hammer and Hong Kong's The Shaw's Brother, which resulted in a wild kung fu take on Van Helsing versus Dracula mythology. So, a little kung fu action. The 70s brought on the sexual vampire. A lot of they brought forth the arousal of the vampire with such
the fan.
films such films as Jess Franco's Vampiros Lesbos, Harry Kumel's Daughters of Darkness, Gene Roland's trio of sexual-infused vampire films, The Shiver of the Vampires, The Rape of the Vampire, and The Nude Vampire, all focused on the sexuality of, you guessed it, the vampire. Blaxploitation subset also happened in the early 70s, which meant a new take on Dracula in Blackula. It came out in 72, followed by Scream, Blackula Scream, both excellent films that used Dracula as a launch point for their own mythologies. Then came Ganja and Hess, an experimental art house horror film that created an entirely new take on vampires altogether. An ancient ceremonial dagger wound leaves Dr. Hess Green, Night of the Living Dead's Dwayne Jones, perpetually hungry for blood. Vampirism was brilliantly used as a metaphor for addiction in those films. We also got 77's Rabid, new radical surgery that leaves somebody, insatiable for blood. We have George A. Romero's Martin, a psychological horror that follows a young man who believed himself to be a vampire. We brings us into the 80s, which I think we all know and love. Fright Night, The Lost Boys, Near Dark Vamp, and Toby Hooper's Life Force. It was all a take on vampires and their attitudes, and it was all about, just being a badass. That was what vampires were in the 80s, just like badass vampires, the bad boys,
And was that when they brought out the whole vampire versus werewolf thing, or was that the 70s? I can't remember.
That would have been the modern vampire. They didn't really start bringing the werewolf versus the vampire until modern. The 90s kicked it off with, Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. We also had Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, which Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise and the beautiful Victoria. Oh, beautiful. We also had Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino's From Dusk Till Dawn, which was a fantastic movie. I still to this day love it and watch it religiously. John Carpenter, Vampires, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the film and the TV show. And it also, Wesley Snipes brought the Marvel Comics character Blade to life in the 90s, which set the stage for future Marvel films and elicited many sequels of his own, as did Selene, a leather-clad warrior vamp fighting on the front lines in the Underworld series, which is where the war of vampires and werewolves came into play. We also got Let the Right One In, Thirst, Stakeland, and What We Do in the Shadows, which is kind of like a Big Brother-esque weird, like follows reality TV vampires living in a house. We also can't forget our beloved young adult romance Twilight, where vampires sparkle in the sun and are moody and fight vampires or werewolves.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the vampire's been a classic, and I think will continue to be a classic staple horror film icon. I mean, Hotel Transylvania, even kids movies.
And
shows and movies and what is it? What's the one my daughter loves? Mona the Vampire is one of them. That was one that we
that was
watched when
from
we were kids.
yeah.
What is her name? Vampirina.
Oh,
So
yeah. And then and then there's Monster High, which there's all different monsters, including vampires.
Dracula's daughter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So vampires play a huge role in mythology, urban legends, media, you name it, vampires are there.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Um, so I have this really cool thing that I stumbled upon. I forgot that I had this in my email to share when we filmed the last time. So I'm glad I actually found it. So this happened a long time ago, and it's called the Great New England Vampire Panic. And the sub context is 200 years after the Salem witch trials, farmers became convinced that their relatives were returning from the grave to feed on the living. So this is like a continuation of the Salem witch
Not only were
trials.
they killed because they thought they were witches, now they're going to be killed because, well, now you're vampires.
Yeah. So let me get the story here. Give me a second. This computer is going to drive me nuts. Okay. So children playing near a hillside gravel mine found the first graves. One ran home to tell his mother, who was skeptical at first, until the boy produced a skull. Because this was Griswold, Connecticut. Holy fuck. Connecticut. Sorry, guys. In
Connecticut.
I don't want to say it again. Police initially thought the burials might be the work of a local serial killer named Micah Ross. Now, I know it's not how you say it. I think I have like this accent when it comes to saying it, and I have to enunciate the words. Anyway, I was talking about the place.
Oh, Connecticut.
Thank you. And they taped off the area as a crime scene. The brown decaying bones turned out to be more than a century old. The Connecticut State archaeologist Nick Bellantoni soon determined that the hillside contained a colonial era farm cemetery. New England is full of such unmarked family plots, and the 29 burials were typical of the 1700s and early 1800s. The dead, many of them children, were laid to rest in thrifty Yankee style in simple wood coffins without jewelry or even much clothing, their arms resting by their sides or crossed over their chests. Come on, go down. Oh my goodness. See, technical error. Okay, there we go. Except that is for burial number 4. Bellantoni was interested in the grave even before the excavation began. It was one of only 2 stone crypts in the cemetery, and it was partially visible from the mine face. Scraping away soil with flat-edged shovels and then brushes and bamboo picks, the archaeologist and his team worked through several feet of earth before reaching the top of the crypt. When Bellantoni lifted the first of the large flat rocks that formed the roof, he uncovered the remains of a red painted coffin and a pair of skeletal feet. They lay, he remembers, in perfect anatomical position. But when he raised the next stone, Bellantoni saw that the rest of the individual had been completely rearranged. The skeleton had been beheaded. Skull and thigh bones rested atop the ribs and vertebrae. It looked like a skull and crossbones motif, a Jolly Roger. I'd never seen anything like it, Bellantoni recalls. Subsequent analysis show that the beheading along with other injuries, including rib fractures, occurred roughly 5 years after death. Somebody had also smashed the coffin. The other skeletons in the gravel hillside, were packaged for reburial, but not JB, as the 50-ish male skeleton from the 1830s came to be called, because of the initials spelled out in brass tacks on his coffin lid. He was shipped to the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Washington, D.C. for further study. Meanwhile, Bellantoni started networking. He invited archaeologists and historians to tour the excavation, soliciting theories. Simple vandalism seemed unlikely, as did robbery, because of a lack of valuables at the site. Finally, one colleague asked, "Ever heard of the Jewett City vampires?" In 1854, in neighboring Jewett City, Connecticut, townspeople had exhumed several corpses suspected to be vampires that were rising from their graves to kill the living. A few newspaper accounts of these events survived. Had the Griswold grave been desecrated for the same reason? In the course of his far-flung research, Bellantoni placed a serendipitous phone call to Michael Bell, a Rhode Island folklorist who had devoted much of the previous decade to studying New England vampire exhumations. The Griswold case occurred at roughly the same time as the other incidents Bell had investigated, and the setting was right. Griswold was rural, agrarian, and bordering southern Rhode Island, where multiple exhumations had occurred. Many of the other vampires, like JB, had been disinterred, grotesquely tampered with, and reburied.
Doesn't sound pleasant.
No, it really doesn't. So I'm just trying to scroll through here. So though scholars today still struggle to explain the vampire panics, a key detail unites them. The public hysteria almost invariably occurred in the midst of savage tuberculosis outbreaks. Indeed, the medical museum's tests ultimately revealed that JB had suffered from tuberculosis or a lung disease very like it. Typically, a rural family contracted the wasting illness, and even though they often received the standard medical diagnosis, the survivors blamed early victims as vampires, responsible for preying upon family members who subsequently fell sick. Often an exhumation was called for to stop the vampires' predations. The particulars of the vampire exhumations, though, vary widely. In many cases, only family and neighbors participated, but sometimes town fathers voted on the matter, or medical doctors and clergymen gave their blessings or even pitched in. Some communities in Maine and Plymouth, Massachusetts, opted to simply flip the exhumed vampire face down in the grave and leave it at that, because that's going to stop the vampire. In Connecticut, Rhode Island,
face down, it's fine.
Yeah, don't worry about it. They'll just think they're right side up and keep digging their way. Yeah. In Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont, though, they frequently burned the dead person's heart, as we heard in Mercy Brown, sometimes inhaling the smoke as a cure. Again, same story. In Europe, too, exhumation protocol varied with region. Some beheaded suspected vampire corpses, while others bound their feet with thorns. Ouch. At least they're dead. Often these rituals were clandestine, lantern-lit affairs, but particularly in Vermont, they could be quite public, even festive. One vampire heart was reportedly torched on the Woodstock, Vermont town green in 1830. In Manchester, hundreds of people flocked to a 1793 heart burning ceremony at a blacksmith's forge. Timothy Mead officiated at the altar in the sacrifice to the demon vampire, who was believed was still sucking the blood of the then living wife of Captain Burton. An early town history says it was the mouth of it was the month of February and good slaying. So yeah.
Oh,
interesting. So that does explain why Mercy Bell's heart was burned to ash and given to her brother, because they thought it was going to be a cure, and yet he so
I am glad modern science has come a little bit further than just burn the dead girl's heart and feed it to her sibling.
yeah, it took some time.
We're still working on it.
We're still working on it. I'm surprised a lot of that didn't happen 50 years ago.
You know, I bet you if you look hard enough.
Yeah, I'm sure in like not as advanced cultures probably still, you know, or like really southern, or not southern, but like really rural areas where they're like witch
Witch, she's a witch.
Torches and pitchforks.
Oh, look.
I'm like, guys, we gotta stop. Torches
I got
and
vampire teeth, so
I know. I wish I did. I don't have fangs. I have.
My kids tell me I have vampire teeth all the time when I smile at them. They're like, Mommy, you have fangs. And I'm like, yeah.
I don't.
Luck of the draw, I guess.
Is it though? Or
Maybe.
are you heartburned and fed to your children?
On next week's episode of Once Upon a Nightmare.
We're gonna be in the same outfits because I ain't changing.
Yeah. But that is the end of this episode. If you guys have any suggestions, don't be afraid to let us know. We're always open. Any ideas that you do have. Our next episode coming up is going to be a fan suggestion by Jen Joyce in Ontario. So we hope you guys enjoy it as much as we do have as much. I hope you guys enjoy it as much as we have fun doing it. Holy cow. There we go.
It's very late.
I'm very tired.
Me too. But we want our weekend. And thank you to Jen Joyce as well for our cute little fan art, which I have on, but you got married, so you changed it. But I posted it to our Instagram if anybody wants to check it out. And I'll look into. Yeah.
Oh.
No, I did mine. I just did mine. I
didn't know if you did both.
That'd be a little heartless of me. Only I got fan art, guys. But yeah, so if you check out our Facebook, I might have it posted there eventually. I haven't been fully on it, and it's been a long week. A long couple weeks, I should say, because I haven't posted in a while. I am going to start a Twitter soon. I have also put up our Patreon, which I think I've mentioned in a couple of previous episodes, and you'll see stuff like my mini podcast that I had to do while Ashley was away and we had technical issues on our Patreon. So it's like extra kind of cool stuff if you subscribe to us. We have 4 different tiers. Pretty much all of them you get like extra stuff. You get what else? One of the tiers you get a sticker, another tier you get a mug, which we wouldn't want a mug that says Once Upon a Nightmare on it. It's really cute actually if you go check it out. And yeah, so that's it for this week.
And we will see you next week with a new nightmare.
We will.
Bye, guys.